Hello, everyone. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Tonight is Thursday, our night for the Timbuktu Report. Dr. Rick Stevenson is out this evening, but we are continuing to take a look at books that we think that would be good for you to add to your list of reads. Tonight, looking at African Americans and their health care. It is said that because of the disparities in healthcare with racism and the ethnic communities, African American, Hispanic, Latinos, that the disparities in healthcare will cost the United States of America close to $50 billion in another 25 years. Billions of dollars every year being spent on healthcare. And when I saw that number, I like to look at that number and say, somebody is getting paid $50 billion. That's the amount of money that will be spent. Companies will be receiving. What is the challenge, and why do we see the health disparities that continue to exist, highlighted by what has taken place over the last year and a half with the COVID-19 pandemic and African Americans dying at a much higher rate than other groups because of the pre-existing conditions. And those pre-existing conditions didn't just show up with COVID. There have been papers, research done by the CDC that showed all of the health disparities in the African American community, whether it was from heart, diabetes, cancer, deaths, whatever it is that you can list when it comes to healthcare. When you look at who's at the top of the list for worst outcomes, it is the African American. And so the question becomes, we just celebrated and about to celebrate July 4th as Independence Day for the United States of America. But Juneteenth, we just celebrated as the day that the slaves in Galveston, Texas heard about the Emancipation Proclamation, and May 20th here in Florida. How in just over 150 years that a group of people who this country was willing to go to war over, keeping them as free labor, are now what appears to be the cash cow for the economy. If $50 billion will be spent on healthcare, then billions again spent in the penitentiary system. How do we look at that and decide that this is my plate, this is my fork, and I am going to decide what I am going to put in my body so that I can have better outcome? When I read that we would be the first generation that would not live as long as our parents, it didn't make sense to me when I read that probably about 30 years ago. And now I'm living it. Just burying my fourth sibling, my sister Catherine, that passed away in May. All of my brothers, Lindsay Jr., James, Leroy, Albert, and now Catherine, none of them lived to be our parents' age. Our parents who lived through the Great Depression, who lived through the oppression of the Jim Crow South, and their children are not living to get to their age. I had heard about Michael Moss, who was an investigative reporter. Heard about Michael in early mid-2000s. He wrote a paper that won him a Pulitzer Prize. It was an investigative piece of journalism on the top food manufacturers in the United States and the role that they play on what we're putting on our plates, and consequently how it's impacting our health. The book is called Hooked, Food, Free Will, and How the Food Giants exploit our addictions. I'd heard about Michael, and then my husband Scott told me that he had a new book out. He also wrote Salt, Sugar, and Fat. And this is just, one of the things that was so telling in an interview that I saw with Michael Moss, the author of this book, Hooked, he said the food industry, they're clear that they're not trying to hide anything. They say they're not trying to hide anything. Unlike, if you remember, the cigarette industry, when there were claims that the cigarette industry, and proven, added additional things to make the cigarettes more addictive. But they say that this level of salt, sugar, and fat that's in our food is, it's labeled, and we're making the decision to consume these unhealthy foods in unhealthy amounts. I'm a salt person. I don't necessarily have to have anything sweet, but I do like salt. And potato chips has been one of my things. And what Michael said, Michael Moss, the author of Sugar, Salt, Fat, and his most recent book, Hooked, he said they have to put so many chemicals in foods that the only way that we can eat them is that there's such a high concentration of salt to mask the taste of the chemicals that they put in the foods. So God did not design the body to process chemicals. So when we're putting these chemicals, they're putting these chemicals in our foods and we are consuming them. And we don't have a process in place to detox, to go on fast where we cleanse our bodies. The body can't do anything except react to it. And we have inflammation. And because of the inflammation, it brings on poor circulation, and poor circulation brings on disease. So to think about the levels of salt and sugar and fat in the foods that we're consuming every day, and we are happily adding them to our grocery carts, um, it can be, um, it makes you wonder whose side are they on, and how do we take control of our health if this is what is in the grocery stores, if this is what has been approved by the Food and Drug Administration, if this is what's known across the industry, and they are competing for your taste buds. Every one of those large food manufacturers are competing for your taste buds. And they do extensive research to see what level of salt and sugar that's palatable. Let me just read you a little bit from Michael's book, Hooked: Food, Free Will, and How the Food Giants Exploit Our Addictions. And it is said, because of the chemicals that's in some of this food, that this food that we're eating is more addictive than drugs and alcohol. That's uncomfortable. Michael wrote, our bodies are hardwired for sweets. Hardwired, the only taste that we're born craving is actually sweet because the mother's milk is sweet. And so babies can survive. God put in us a desire for sweet, which kind of helped me some when I read that. I thought, okay, so it's not it's not unusual that I like sweet things, but my preference is salt. And that we don't start craving salt or even recognizing salt until we're about 6 months old. And it just depends on what our families are feeding us, whether or not we have this strong desire even for salt. He writes, our bodies are hardwired for sweets. So food giants have developed 56 types of sugar to add to their products. 56 different types of sugar. And we wonder why we have the diabetes issues that we have in this country. 56 types of sugar to add to their products, creating in us the expectation that everything should be Southern sweet tea sweet. Oh, I just put that in there. But we have an expectation that things are going to be sweet. We've evolved to prefer fast food, convenient meals, hence our modern day preference for ready to eat foods. And it is convenient. Initially, it's convenient, but we're paying for it on the other end. Moss goes on to show how the processed food industry, including major companies like Nestle's, Mars, and Kellogg's, has tried not only to evade this troubling discovery about the addictiveness of food, but to actually exploit this addiction. As the obesity rates continue to climb, manufacturers are now claiming to add ingredients that can effortlessly cure our compulsive eating habits. That this is just a fascinating read. If you think that you have a food addiction, you're probably right. Most of us do. Most of us do. And then it starts to impact our bodies. Anytime you have stiffness in your joints, anytime there's pain in your body, anytime you wake up in the morning and you have a puffy face, think about, what did I put in my body that is causing me to react this way? Because our bodies talk to us and they tell us what's good and what's not good for us. The advice that I was given once was, eat as close to where you came from. I'm not talking about your geographical location. I'm talking about humans. We came from the earth. And the closer we eat to that, the better the body responds. And it can be very, very difficult because we have been moved in the direction of expecting quick things, expecting fast food, and our bodies are paying the cost. 50 billion. $50 billion. That's just on African Americans. In another 25 years, $50 billion companies will be paid because we are not getting better. We are getting sicker. Our children, I just did a clinic with some children this week, and to see the inflexibility of children in middle school and high school. And it is uncomfortable for me to look around the group that I was working with, thinking, if you have trouble keeping your knees straight and you can't touch the floor, I don't know where you're going to be in your 30s. It is a sad reality. And the other part that we're not looking at is how these additives, how these artificial colorings are impacting the brain. Mental illness in the African American community is on the rise. How does that play out, and how profitable is that? Some kids are responding to red dyes, the dyes that are in the food, and they get labeled and then they get put on a medication because they're simply responding to what is going in their bodies. You cannot expect children to perform at their optimum potential if they're not getting good stuff in their bodies. $50 billion. Hooked is the book that we've been talking about tonight. Food, free will, and how food giants exploit our addictions. And Michael says that our bodies and our brain responds to sugar faster. Get this. The brain responds to these 50 plus different kinds of sugars that manufacturers are putting in our food, these fructose corn syrup and all these various things that we can't even pronounce. Our bodies respond to sugar faster than it does drugs, heroin, cocaine. Remember, just because crack is illegal and sugar, salt, and fat are not, does not mean anything because your cells don't understand legislation. We have to be wise in how we take care of this first gift that was given us, the place for our spirit to live, the place for the spirit to live. And the scripture says that the Holy Spirit cannot live in an unclean temple. And I think that we get lost in what we think is good for our bodies just because it is legal. When we're putting things in our bodies that will break down the cells, that can actually eat up the body, and that's what's happening. Disease eating up our bodies. That is not taking care of the vessel. It is not easy. It is not easy. And the unfortunate thing is, as far as the African American community is concerned, yes, there was the Emancipation Proclamation. Speaking, Ricardo, speaking as someone who has, I just want to read this. Speaking as someone who has depression and arthritis in their left knee, I can confirm food and meds play a role in health, and unfortunately, in public schools, lower income schools aren't always provided the healthier, safer options, leading to less productivity in the classroom and outside the classroom. Don't even get me started on the way class time and curriculum is set up. 25 years old, if I'm correct. And he's already seeing and recognizing how this is impacting him. 25 years old. Ricardo, I would love to have you on sometime to talk about exactly what you're going through because this is a real problem. It's a real challenge. And um, while we're having the protest on Black Lives Matter, the killings and the death rate is even higher as a result of what's on our plates that's been approved by the Food and Drug Administration. The disparities and the exploitation of people of color in the United States is going to cost $50 billion. Somebody is getting paid $50 billion because we're sick. When I think about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad and how they were able to run to freedom, and I think about our inability to walk sometimes, we would not be able to run to freedom. And I am certainly not in any position to, um, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I just want to make you aware of this is not just your fault. There are things that are being put in our foods that make them more addictive. There are things, additives that have been added that stimulate our taste buds to make us desire more. I just would encourage you to drink more water, be conscientious about your sugar, salt, and fat consumption. You may have to put forth a little extra effort to make meals at home. Um, but man, it's worth it. I remember going back to help take care of my parents. My father was almost 80 when he died, and my mother's 75. And I said to one of my siblings, if we would start eating like this right now, the way the doctors, the diet that they laid out for them, we would not have the high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, any of the problems that my parents were diagnosed with. And I'm a firm believer that many of the things that we're dealing with, it's not just heredity. It's the fact that we all ate out of the same pot. We all ate the same kind of food. And so thus we have similar uh, health outcomes, but we can change it. And it is in our power to do that. The book that we're talking about is called Hook by Michael Moss, who also wrote the New York Times bestselling book, Salt, Sugar, Fat. It is within your power to change the health outcome for you and your family and your community. I want to commend my brother Reginald Marshall in Nashville. He is a registered nurse, but he's also a farmer. And I have a story posted about him. One of the Nashville TV stations did a story on him. Reggie is actually growing vegetables in pots. So you may say, well, I don't have any place to grow vegetables. Well, he's growing them in flower pots. I've been doing some sprouting. Do whatever you can. Save you. I thank you very much for joining us. Ricardo, would you message me so that I can get your number? Um, we have but one life to live. We're not going to get another body. This is it. And we have to answer for how we took care of it. And my prayer is that you will take a closer look at what you're putting in your grocery basket, what you're bringing in your house, what you're putting on your table. Thank you for joining us. We will see you Monday on Sisters of Wellness. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. For our entire team here at the Timbuktu Report, Dr. Rick Stevenson is away. We miss you, Dr. Stevenson. We thank you for joining us. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at the well. Make it a great moment.